the honourable member for St. Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my absolute pleasure to stand today as the elected representative for the people of St. Albert. I'm equally proud to rise today and share some information about this wonderful community. The beautiful city of St. Albert is also known as the Botanical Arts City. It is the second largest city in the Edmonton Capital Region and shares its wonderful home with more than 63,000 proud citizens. Many of you will know that St. Albert was originally settled as a Métis community and was founded in 1861 by Father Albert Lacombe. St. Albert boasts a large, thriving Francophone community which adds to the unique community feel. In fact, it may surprise you to know that roughly 10% of St. Albertans can actually speak French today. The people of St. Albert are proud of their community, and so they should be. In 2014, St. Albert was named the best place to live in Canada by Money Sense magazine. And just a few weeks ago, St. Albert was named the best place in Canada to raise a family by that same magazine. Few in St. Albert were surprised by this recognition because they realize how fortunate they are to call St. Albert home. St. Albert is home to the world-renowned International Children's Festival that runs for 5 days each spring and entertains over 55,000 children of all ages. Albertans come from all over the region to enjoy this event and share in the welcoming community and arts. As well, the St. Albert Outdoor Farmers Market is the largest of its kind in Western Canada, with over 250 local vendors offering homegrown, homemade, and home-baked goods for thousands who shop there. I can't talk about St. Albert without paying respect to the Honourable and Extraordinary Lois Hole. I know the entire community of St. Albert was bursting with pride when Lois Hole was named Alberta's 15th Lieutenant Governor in 1999. This successful businesswoman, writer, gifted gardener, and mother of 9 was a tireless advocate for public education, and she was a tireless community activist. She was the driving force behind the Lois Hole Hospital for Women, for which thousands of Alberta's women are grateful. Lois Hole once joked school teachers should earn as much as NHL players. Not a bad idea. She was an inclusive woman, kind and always ready to lend a hand to anyone who asked, and even some who didn't. This kind, practical, and loving woman, affectionately called everyone's grandmother, was an amazing ambassador for the city of St. Albert. One of my favorite pieces of public art in St. Albert is a statue honoring her. It's a depiction of her kneeling down in front of a small child and both looking at each other lovingly. Knowing what I do of her, I think this statue and this piece of art is very appropriate. The Lois Hole Hospital for Women houses a banner that bears this now famous quote from its namesake. My hope is that when people come to this new hospital and see my name, they're going to have a little extra hope, that real uplifting hope that things will turn out okay. She was a breathtaking woman. As in all communities, the growth and joy that is experienced now is always preceded by opportunities to learn and grow. 5 decades ago, 2 residential schools for Indigenous children operated in St. Albert. The 2 physical structures burned down long ago, but the scars remain. And St. Albert can be proud of its commitment to forge and nurture relationships with the Aboriginal community members by moving beyond just speaking about truth and reconciliation to living reconciliation. As is the case throughout Alberta, unfortunately, St. Albert is also home to many women, men, and children who struggle daily due to poverty and its results. Poverty was once thought to be contained in the inner core of big cities, but is now receiving wider recognition throughout the province. 2 weeks ago, I was able to spend some time at the St. Albert Food Bank. I was astonished to hear from the staff and volunteers at the food bank that over 600 individuals and families who must regularly use the food bank to feed themselves and their families. Over the last 12 months, food bank usage has steadily increased and shows no sign of slowing down. As you might expect, economic uncertainties and related job losses have contributed to increased food bank reliance. But that is not the biggest contributor to the increased reliance on the St. Albert Food Bank. domestic violence is the single largest cause of reliance on the food bank. And I want to thank the Premier for her initiative in the creation of the Women's Issues Ministry to help those already taxed agencies addressing these needs. I, like so many, was thankful to hear our new government's commitment to addressing violence against women in the speech from the throne. The people of St. Albert clearly recognize the need for education, action, and prevention related to domestic violence. The Safe Society, which stands for Stop Abuse in Families, is a community-based organization that has, since it began in 1989, offered support to individuals and families that experience domestic violence. St. Albert is truly a beautiful city, both in appearance and in spirit. It's a fine example of what an inclusive city and government can achieve. Inclusivity is not simply a word sprinkled in local policy, but is a way of life there. For the last 14 years, I have worked as the Executive Director for the Losika Foundation of St. Albert. This nonprofit organization supports people with disabilities so that they're able to live and work in their communities. During my 14 years there, I was able to see firsthand how the community of St. Albert worked with local leaders and activists to promote inclusion. Local government and community leaders sought out assistance from residents with disabilities and advocacy groups in order to create inclusive employment policies and practices, accessible and affordable transportation and housing. What this community got right is that it is imperative to include people in decision-making when those decisions impact their lives. In 2013, I was fortunate enough to participate in something that forever changed my life. I was part of a group of 19 that traveled to Tanzania. The group was made up of Losika Foundation staff members, people with disabilities, and some of their family members. For over a year, we fundraised and trained together so that we could climb Kilimanjaro in order to raise money for a small charitable group in rural Tanzania that worked with children with disabilities. Only 2 people who set out to climb the mighty Kilimanjaro had to turn back before reaching the summit. During this grueling 5-day trek, I learned that it is the journey that matters most. I learned that anything is possible if you believe it is, and I learned that every person is capable of great things if they are supported, valued, and included. We left our final camp for the summit just after midnight on the last day. At almost 20,000 feet, the air is thin and quite cold. The exhaustion and smell after days of endless trekking is physically and mentally draining. Approximately 8 hours after leaving camp, we arrived at the rim of the crater and knew we only had about an hour of trekking left. At this point, I had literally run out of energy and couldn't fathom taking one more step, let alone trek for another hour. At that precise moment, a young man who happens to have a developmental disability took me by the arm and told me that we would walk the rest of the way together. We did walk the rest of the way together, and we did reach the summit together. And I was the one that was most vulnerable that day. Together, all of us have much to do to restore power in decision-making and inclusion for the people of Alberta. I believe over the last few years, we've lost our way and focus by choosing not to really hear and consult with the people of Alberta, not just those who have big voices and powerful voices, but all people. Community consultation is not simply a standalone exercise, but the building of nurturing relationships. We can't create policy without listening to the people whose lives are impacted by the policy. Through my work and in my personal life, I've witnessed the dangers of well-meaning policy created without real community consultation and impact assessment. Recently, slight adjustments in budget line items to support people with developmental disabilities literally put thousands of men and women at risk. Current changes to housing safety standards for people with developmental disabilities have inadvertently put people with disabilities who want to live independently in their communities at risk of losing that very housing. The intent was good, and the result is not. Similarly, the labels we assign to people can innocently chip away at their dignity. The language we use to describe people in our community is important. I am grateful that this new government, on both sides, has chosen not to refer to people with disabilities as our most vulnerable, but as people first, people who need and deserve our support. My brother, like so many others, struggled his entire life with an illness, a disability, schizophrenia. My brother had a great deal to offer this community, or his community, when he had access to help and the support he needed. However, when necessary mental health care supports were not available, he fell through the cracks like many people. Even the most loving and supportive families cannot rescue people from cracks that can become deep canyons. My brother was one of the many who believed ending his life was his only solution. Every time I hear about another family losing a child or loved one to suicide, I'm physically reminded of the acute pain of loss and the necessity to ensure that mental health supports are available to people whose very lives depend on them. I'm honored to sit in this assembly with the vast collection of life experiences and individual goals, which are as diverse as the very people we were elected to represent. Now more than ever, it is vital that we find a way to work together to meet the collective needs of all Albertans. Hope is a powerful thing. Albertans are hopeful when they look at us assembled here. People are hopeful we will make decisions that will guide them into an inclusive future. People are hopeful that we will set aside party-first mentality and replace it with Alberta first. Thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about St. Albert and myself.